All right, folks, it's Bass Action back in action here. In this video, we are going to look at what happens to the angle pairs that we've been studying when the lines that we're given are actually parallel. We've been looking at these angle pairs pretty extensively and getting familiar with them when the lines are not parallel, and what we've seen is the angles are generally not congruent or have no particular relationship. But when the lines become parallel, some very significant relationships occur. We'll explore this more in class, and we can dig into the proofs of these. But right now, I just want you to get comfortable looking at the lines when they're parallel and starting to recognize what the relationships between the different angles will be when the lines are parallel. So let's just jump in. This is going to be pretty quick. First thing that we want to remind you, if you don't remember, is that this symbol right here, these double slashes, kind of angled forward slashes, means parallel, okay? So if our two lines are parallel, remember we can name lines with a single cursive letter. So if these lines L and M are parallel, so we're told they're parallel, we can actually mark our picture with these arrows. Okay, so we could either put like single arrows on them, you can put double arrows on them, but if these lines are parallel, we can look at the angle pair that's been marked here for us. We should be able to easily recognize that 1 and 2 are corresponding angles here. And if our lines are parallel, then these corresponding angles are actually congruent to each other. So the statement that we'll be able to make if we know the lines are parallel is that this angle 1 and angle 2, remember I like to put the little arc between mine, angle 1 is going to be congruent to angle 2. And our reason, we're going to write this in an if-then notation. What we're going to do is we're going to say parallel lines, and that's going to stand for if parallel lines. We won't write the if. Then we're going to give ourselves our arrow for then, and we're going to say corresponding angles congruent. So let's break this notation down again. This is going to be the if, this is whatever we're given. So if our lines are parallel, we'll be able to say parallel lines. Then this is going to be our conclusion. And when we write the reason, it's going to be more general. What kind of angles have we identified, and what relationship have we said about them? So there's the corresponding, there's our congruent. This statement will be specific to the picture. So on our next one, again, you can see that we're given that we've got some parallel lines. So we can do a couple things. We can mark the lines as parallel with those little arrows. We can, on our statement down here, on our reason down here, we can immediately recognize that we're going to say something about parallel lines, okay? Then we're going to look at the picture and say, hey, what kind of angles are we given in this picture? And I can see in this picture that I'm given alternate interior angles, okay? So our conclusion is going to have something to do in both places. We're going to mention something about these alternate interior angles. Our eyes are pretty clear on this one, and again, we'll explore these in more detail as to why this is happening, but we can see in this picture that these angles are congruent. So we'll be able to say for our statement specific to the picture that angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. In our reason, we want to talk about the kind of angles that we've been given, in this case, alternate interior angles. And we also want to talk about the relationship that we saw between those alternate interior angles and that they are congruent. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is alternate interior angles. So let's take a look at our picture. Again, we're given that lines are parallel, so we always want to get in the habit of marking that these are parallel, because remember, if the lines are not parallel, there will be no relationship between the angles. Okay, so we've got our lines parallel. We know that on our reason, we're going to ultimately start with those parallel lines. The angles we're given, we can see are alternate exterior angles. Our eyes are pretty clear to us here. We can make a guess what our statement's going to be about, and that these angles are going to be congruent to each other. And that's what we'll say here, angle 5 congruent to angle 6. Now, for our reason, the reason needs to talk about what we knew was true, lines parallel. Then our conclusion is going to talk about the kind of angles, alternate exterior angles, and what did we know about them? They were congruent. The last one that we're going to look at here is going to be our consecutive interior angles. And when we look at our picture, it's important to kind of just think logically. These angles don't even look congruent, okay? So when we look at our picture up here, yeah, our eyes kind of knew they were congruent. We can guess on these consecutive interior angles that this is going to be a different relationship. We're still going to start with our parallel lines. It's really important to keep that straight. We're going to look at the converses later on. Okay, so if our lines are parallel, when we look at these angles, they are not going to be congruent this time. They're actually going to be supplementary. Again, we're going to dig into the why behind these a little bit later. So we're going to say here, I started to write a C there because I was thinking about those consecutive interior angles. We want to talk about angle 7 and angle 8, and this time they're going to be supplementary. Okay, so remember, when we get to our reason, we're going to mention our parallel lines, then what kind of angles were we working with? Consecutive interior angles. That's what's going to go here. And then what is the relationship between those, and it's supplementary. Okay, so you guys are going to practice with just this notation. I will throw in, you're going to see this one in your practice. Just like our consecutive interior angles are going to be supplementary, we're also going to find that the consecutive exterior angles are going to be supplementary as well. All right, so we're just going to practice those, and then in class we'll dig in more on the whys behind this, and then recognizing them in more complicated pictures.